One of the most substantial renewable sources of energy is wind energy. Wind power has three main destination points. The natural wind in our atmosphere is captured and converted into mechanical energy, which is then converted into electricity. Wind power was originally used several centuries ago in the form of a simple windmill to pump water and ground grain. And modern wind turbines use the kinetic energy of wind to generate electricity. These turbines usually comprise of 3 rotor blades, a nacelle that houses the generator and gearbox, a tower, and power cables. A wind turbine works the opposite way of a regular fan. A fan uses electricity to make wind, whereas a wind turbine uses wind to make electricity. The basic mechanics of a turbine start with the wind causing the rotor blades to turn. This rotation then spins a shaft in the nacelle. There's a low speed and a high speed shaft, and both are controlled and connected by the gearbox. The gearbox increases the speed of rotation to somewhere between 1,000 and 1,800 RPM, or rotations per minute, which is the speed needed to produce electricity. And finally, the generator produces 60-cycle AC electricity. The wind industry began to really develop in the 1970s. It started with the first American Wind Energy Association meeting in 1974, followed by the first large-scale wind turbine established by the University of Massachusetts. The first wind farm, which is basically an area of land with many turbines, was created in New Hampshire, and the number of wind farms began to increase throughout the decade. In 1993, the variable speed turbine was introduced. This turbine had a gearbox similar to the modern-day turbine, and by the 2000s, there were 5 major wind turbine manufacturing facilities in the United States, and now the country's wind capacity is over 60,000 megawatts. So here is a graph that depicts the growth of the global wind industry over the past 15 years. As you can see, there has been an exponential increase in the wind capacity worldwide. In 2000, there was a global capacity of 17,400 megawatts, and in 2015, that number became a whopping 432,883 megawatts. This graph just goes to show how the wind industry has grown incredibly in recent years and will most likely continue to do so. There are 3 major types of wind power. First, utility scale wind is the largest type, with wind turbines of 100 kilowatt capacity or greater. This electricity is carried to the power grid, and electric utilities and power system operators distribute it to the user. Distributed wind, which is also known as small wind, is when there are turbines of 100 kilowatts or smaller. This wind is used to directly power homes, farms, and small businesses. And lastly, offshore wind is for wind turbines that are set up in bodies of water around the world. There are many benefits to wind power, starting with its environmental advantages. Wind energy conserves water resources in comparison to other forms of energy. For example, nuclear power can take 600 times more water than wind to produce the same amount of electricity. And similarly, coal takes about 500 times more water than wind does. Turbines also do not add any emissions that contribute to mercury contamination in lakes or streams. And wind is one of the only sources of electricity that does not produce any harmful emissions that can contribute to global warming or acid rain. So essentially, wind energy is pollution-free. Furthermore, wind power produces no greenhouse gases, barring the gases from manufacture, installation, and maintenance. On the other hand, coal and natural gas produce very large quantities of greenhouse gases. Although it seems like wind farms take up a lot of land, the actual footprint is very small, thus preserving land, and the wind turbines do not disturb or reduce agriculture and farming. There are also several economic advantages of wind power. The economies of rural communities can be diversified because wind farms add a new branch of revenue for these communities. In other forms of electricity generation, fuel has to be shipped to a processing plant, but wind energy generates electricity without the additional costs of mining or transportation. Wind power is very stable because the price is fixed and free, and it promotes cost-effective energy production because wind-generated electricity costs only about 2.5 to 5 cents per kilowatt hour today. Wind energy projects create many new jobs, from meteorologists to surveyors, and from structural engineers to technicians. Wind power also brings national energy independence, where the nation does not have to rely on other countries for its own energy supply. With that being said, there are definitely some setbacks to wind energy. The main disadvantage is that wind energy is very variable in that the electricity cannot be produced if there's no wind. The other setbacks are relatively minor though, starting with how wind turbines are aesthetically unappealing to many people. There are also complaints of the loud noise made by the machines. And another thing is that the slowly rotating blades can kill birds and bats, but not nearly as many as are killed by cars, power lines, and high-rise buildings. Here is a map of the average wind speed in the United States. Most of the country's wind power is generated in the Great Plains region because of its high wind speeds, as shown on this map. Although we can see the general wind speeds in these regions, wind is always fluctuating and is therefore unreliable. Because wind power is weather dependent, it is important to be able to accurately forecast wind for reliable wind power integration. There are several different models for wind power forecasting. Researchers use physical, statistical, and hybrid methods to figure out wind speed and power with a 90% accuracy rate. The future for wind power is extremely optimistic. Experts predict that wind power will supply 35% or about a third of the United States electrical demand by 2050 and will have the potential to supply much more. Wind will definitely be the most cost-effective energy source, both globally and individually. There will eventually be a full commercialization of wind technology, just like how solar power has become commercialized in the past decade. Wind is undeniably a major aspect for the future of this planet. Thank you for listening to this presentation.